is Simone. Today we are going to be talking about a very controversial topic that originally we had actually had one of our black friends on to talk about with us, but his recording quality wasn't very good. So we're going to raw dog this. Two white people talking about black culture with no protection. This is not going to turn out well.
Yo, so I'm raw dogging this chick, right? She goes, yo, I'm on birth control. So now this is Dylan. He just turned 2 the other day.
But I'm going to share some graphs with you. One you've seen before. So the one you've seen before, putting on screen here, this is the one that shows that in the United States, the Black American fertility rate is literally the lowest fertility rate of any ethnic group for all individuals in that group with over a 30% income.
Oh, what?
The top 70% of black earners, if you compare them with the top 70% of earners from any other ethnic group, it is the absolute lowest and by a significant margin. Now, somebody could be like, oh, what about that one little area where the purple line is below the red line, right? And it's like, well, that purple line is native born, non-Hispanic, other Asian multi, which I don't really think of an ethnic group. It's just sort of, it turns out when people are multi-ethnic, they have incredibly low fertility rates. But that's not the surprising thing. I mean, that is surprising to me at least.
Yeah, hello.
Fertility rates are. But it gets worse. So I'm going to quote here. In 2012, the U.S. Census Bureau found that African Americans aged 35 and older were more likely to be married than white Americans from 1980 until sometime around the 1960s. Not only did they swap places in the 60s, but in the 1980s, the number of never married African Americans began a staggering climb from about 10% to more than 25% by 2010. And by the way, it's gotten way above that in 2020. It's at 48%. In 2008, it was 44%. Like,
at first it seems shocking, and then you think, wait a second, no. Like, when you think about older black communities, the marriage rate is high. Like, these are very traditional nuclear families.
It's not just that. In the 1940s, they did a study. Black illegitimacy rates were only 19%, which was lower than the white rates during that period.
That also makes sense. When you think of
70% of black families have kids outside of wedlock.
So we went from less, and now it's 70%.
No, I'd like to note here how much less it was than white communities. So right now, if you look at white American kids, 28% are born out of wedlock. In black communities in the 1940s, it was only 19%.
Well, so when I think about this, it makes a lot of sense, because when I think about historical black communities or anything that I read about influential figures in the space, there's a lot of religion. There's a lot of very traditional views. Like, it is a more conservative.
Get off this porch. You ought to be ashamed of yourselves, dancing to the devil like that.
And also, I don't know how to articulate this, but like, more buttoned up, respectful, and less trashy. Like, when I think about the time, I think also, like, even just American presidents are just like when you think about historical white figures and then historical black figures, the historical black figures are just so like respectable, intelligent, smart, wholesome, religious. And then you think about, like, we've got Andrew Jackson. I mean, even Abraham Lincoln was a bit of a slob. Like, people were like, grow a beard, sir, please.
But this is where it gets really interesting. And I want to talk about the theft and zombification of black culture. Because when you look at the BLM movement, what was one of the things they had on their website that they were promoting? These frauds who were running this movement. This is the Black Lives Matter movement, for people who don't know. They was supposed to be promoting like black culture and identity. It was that being anti-nuclear family, being anti-marriage, being pro-kids not having two parents, that was an intrinsically black thing.
Now, the Black Lives Matter Foundation, right on their website, says that they aim at deconstructing the Western prescribed traditional family structure, excluding fathers specifically.
that part of BLM's agenda was the destruction of the nuclear family because they saw that as Black culturally, when actually the exact opposite is true. Historically speaking, Black culture was more pro-nuclear family than white culture.
Yeah.
They were more family-oriented than white culture.
Yeah.
Only 9 months, but he knows that he is safe, and he is warm, and his mother loves him. And that's the best kind of a beginning any baby can have.
God looked at man, he said it's not good for man to be alone. He gave him a woman. He didn't give him a village. He didn't give him the community. It's supposed to be God, husband, wife, child. And that's the natural order. You know, the effect that it's had, we've had women for generations now saying that they don't need a man, and we have boys that don't want to be one.
And you see other examples of this, like, remember the Smithsonian race card?
What I'm thinking about more is the most recent historical Black community museum thing we went to, remember, was the museum in Tulsa, Oklahoma, which talked about the Black business community that was formed there. And that's what just stands in it's such stark contrast to me, that the destruction of that community to a great extent was driven by white anger about how much that community was thriving, and like, oh, they're so wealthy, like how and we have to destroy it because it's so good. And now, like, so we went from this amazing like Black capitalism and business owners and traditional families to Black Lives Matter, essentially saying that Marxist ideals are what are Black ideals.
No, but it's worse than that. So I'm gonna put on screen here this thing that was created by the Smithsonian for like staffers.
Okay.
And it goes through and it talks about what white culture is, and then by extension, it's trying to say this is the antithesis of what Black culture is. So just to read it, white dominant culture, or whiteness, refers to the way white people and their traditions, attitudes, and ways of life have been normalized over time and are now considered standard practices in the United States. And since white people still hold most of the institutional power in America, we have all internalized some aspects of white culture, including people of color. So the first thing they say that's white culture: rugged individualism.
Oh,
the
what?
individual is the primary unit. Self-reliance, independence, and autonomy are highly valued plus rewarded. Individuals assume to be in control of their environment. You get what you deserve. So independence and autonomy being highly valued. Self-reliance, rugged individualism. That was part of earlier Black culture. Like this family structure. Then it says the nuclear family. Father, mother, and 2 to 3 children is the ideal social unit. Husband is the breadwinner and head of the household. Wife is the homemaker and subordinate to the husband. Children should have their own rooms and be independent. So nuclear family, evil. Individualism, evil. Even though if you have at all studied historic Black culture, that those were very prominent features of earlier Black culture. Then you have emphasis on the scientific method. Here they say objected, rational, and linear thinking, cause and effect relationships, and quantitative emphasis. They see all this as being intrinsically white.
Oh, those numbers.
Here's some other fun ones. The Protestant work ethic. Hard work is the key to success. Work before play. Quote, if you don't meet your goals, you didn't work hard enough, end quote.
Like, this seems incredibly racist.
It does seem, well, and that one is really interesting because if you look and if you know any Black person who grew up, like if you've talked with older Black people, they're like, I was raised believing I had to work 5 times as hard for the same rewards and learn to be happy about it.
Yeah.
Like that was hard work was like the key to historic Black culture. And then hold on. It gets worse. Religion. They say Christianity is the norm. Oh my gosh, Blacks shouldn't be Christian anymore, I guess. Oh,
I mean, I guess I slightly more understand that because if I understand correctly, Christianity was first on a wide scale introduced to ancestrally Black populations in the context of slavery. And
really. That's not really true, though.
Yeah, well, I don't know when missionary work in Africa started, so I don't know, but it could. I mean, it could be.
Our ancestors were brought into Christianity by a conquering foreign force that often used slavery. Like, I'm from England, bro. Like, The Roman, look at Boudica. Like, the Roman Empire was not the most pleasant of people, but I still see that we are better under civilization than we were when we would sacrifice children under new bridges that were being built to appease the gods so the bridge wouldn't collapse. You know, hold on. I got to go through over more things from this.
Okay. Yikes.
Here's some fun ones that they say are white things. Plan for the future, delayed gratification, tomorrow will be better, follow rigid time schedules.
You don't get to just take all the best virtues and be like,
decision making, majority rules.
Wait, majority rule. Majority rules.
Protect property and entitlements.
Do they have a version for Black culture? Like what is the inverse of this?
Clear that they think, but I mean, the reason I wanted to bring this up is so that we could get a better understanding of just how twisted and erased actual Black culture was historically. And I'm going to put a graph on screen here that I think shows the horror of all of this, where you can see the moment that all of this changed, which was the 1960s. It's sort of, the change began in the 1950s. You have this sort of flat line here in terms of Black women being more likely to be married than white women, and it was twice as likely to be married, by the way. Only 5% of Black women during this period were unmarried, while 10% of white women were. And then it shoots up to now like 48%, right? So the question then became for me, well, holy shiz, because you see first a slow increase from 1950 to 1980, and then an explosion after 1980. So the question is, what started to happen in a slow way between 1950 and 1980 that led to this erasure of the historic Black culture, and then happened in a big way post that? And I need to be clear here about like what the outcome of this erasure, what the outcome of 70% of Black kids being born to single parents is. So here's one study here. After controlling for maternal education, age, children's age, and gender, we find that the odds of being poor for Black children in non-intact families are 3.7x higher, so 370% higher than for Black children in married families.
Wow.
After controlling for maternal education, as well as adults' gender, age, and AFQT scores, we find the odds of Black young adults getting a college degree are 70% higher if they were raised by their own two parents. And Black children who grew up in a single family were 180% more likely to spend time in jail by their 20s. In fact, Black children from intact family uniformly do better than white children from single family. This is true whether you're looking at income, incarceration rates, or college. For instance, 36% of young Black women from intact families have graduated from college compared to just 28% of young white women from single families. Likewise, 14% of young Black men from intact families have been incarcerated compared to 18% of young white men from single parent families. Moreover, 13% of Black children in intact families were poor compared to 33% of white children in single parent families. But here's where it gets worse. There have been a series, and I'll add in post some of the names here. Specifically here, Christina Cross, a sociologist at Harvard University, who in a New York Times op-ed, The Myth of the Two-Parent Home, Cross contended that, quote, living apart from a biological parent does not carry the same cost for Black youth as white peers, end quote. And then also Regina S. Baker at Stoney Center on Socioeconomic Inequality at SUNY Graduate Center of university academics who are trying to get people to normalize to the idea that Blacks are not actually as affected as whites by being in single parent families, and therefore we shouldn't create families to incentivize this. And it is true, they are, like, the benefits to them are slightly lower than the benefits to white people, but the benefits are effing enormous. Enormous. When you look at this shift that happened in the 80s, you need to ask what caused this shift, because most of the problems of the modern Black American culture and community are very obviously due to this shift.
Yeah.
Consider how well the average Black American would have done in a world where Black women were having kids within marriage or outside of marriage at half the rate that white women had children outside of marriage.
Yeah. Well, and I'm also thinking about what we touched on at the very beginning, which is that Black birth rates are abysmal. And one of the top things that helps birth rates of any group is marriage and young marriage. And if marriage is a major, I mean, it seems to be a major leading indicator of plummeting birth rates.
Well, and here and I note here, so people are like, what, are you saying that blacks historically were not the same as they are today? Yeah, actually, and here's something where I was asking AI. The incarceration rate differences between blacks and white Americans in 1950 was lower than modern rates. So,
and this was 1950s, an era in the United States where discrimination was
racist. Yeah,
systematized.
The incarceration rates in the 1950s were 5x higher than white rates. So to say it's significantly higher today is saying quite a lot.
Yeah.
Specifically, it was 5x the rate of whites in the 1950s, and it's 7x the rate of whites today. But you've got to keep in mind the amount of institutional racism that was in the system in the 1950s. It's just not there today.
And we're not saying that there isn't still institutional racism. It's just that there's been we now have 50 years of intervening, fighting against it, and legislating against it, and regulating against it, and culturally fighting against it. So we are in a better position now, hopefully, than we were back then.
So what was being pushed? Because remember I said you see the beginning of this in the 1950s and then acceleration in the 1980s. So what ideas were being pushed within Black culture in the 1950s, or beginning to be pushed? Well, in 1957, a book came out called Wayward Lives, Beautiful Experiments, An Intimate History of Social Upheaval. And it was about Black culture. It talked about Black women moving to free love, common law and transient marriages, serial partnerships, cohabitation outside of wedlock, queer relationships, and single motherhood.
This sounds like white hippie stuff. This does not sound like historical Black culture or like honoring.
It wasn't historic Black culture. It was Marxist nonsense that co-opting.
Okay, how did this happen? How did Marxism attack Black culture or take over Black culture?
Well, so I think it's very much that Blacks have always felt that they can rely on one party and not the other party. Originally, it was the Republicans, and then they shifted to the Democrats, but they voted uniformly in really high levels. And we're going to go over that later in this episode. And because of that, they don't see the threats from their own party. So the Democratic side right now is ongoing an active Black genocide campaign. And you could say, no, they're not undergoing an active Black genocide campaign. Well, they did set up Black Parenthood. The founder of it, Margaret Sanger, did go to KKK rallies. She did say the purpose of it was to remove unfit genes and specifically noted Blacks among those. And if you didn't have Planned Parenthood in the United States, the amount of Black people in the United States would be literally over 25% higher.
If Planned Parenthood didn't exist.
Yeah, and you could say, well, they don't do that anymore. And then I'm like, yeah, except for the fact that 89% of Planned Parenthood clinics are in minority communities today.
Yeah, I used to attend Planned Parenthood for reproductive health, like to get birth control pills prescribed. And I was always the only white person in the office.
It went from a world of... Yeah, and that's the thing. Like, people are like, well, Planned Parenthood isn't exactly trying to eradicate the Black community from our country. It's like, well, I mean, okay, I don't think that anybody who is working at a Planned Parenthood knows that that's what it was set up in part to do. I don't think that they are aware of its... In all of these Klan connections and stuff, go to our Planned Parenthood episode. This is all admitted on the Planned Parenthood website. This isn't some like wild conspiracy. You're like, oh, it's regrettable that all this happened. And then I'm like, then why haven't you moved your effing clinics out of the minority communities, bro? Like,
well, come on, Malcolm. I mean, they have a clear answer for that. They're trying to serve underserved communities that don't have ready access to other forms of healthcare.
But it's moved from, we are systemically trying to erase this community because they are lesser than other communities, to, we are trying to systemically erase you because we love you. Optionality, bro. No, it's messed up. It's messed up.
No, it is really messed up.
But hold on. It gets worse than this when you look at the long-term outcomes of this. So right now, and I'll wait to shock you with this statistic.
Okay.
Only 1 in 4 young Black men in New York has a job right now.
What?
75% of young Black men are unemployed. So... remember that book I mentioned, The Wayward Lives, Beautiful Experiments, right? So it mentioned that Black women who were employed had a hard time finding men who were employed. The
Mhm.
ratio being something like 10-5 or something close. And this is something you actually see. So now we're going to talk about why their fertility rate is so low. It's in part that Black women just have a really, really hard time finding Black men, and
Mm.
Black men have a hard time locking down Black women, but
Mhm.
it gets a little worse than that. So imagine you're like a sane conservative Black man who, we had as the guy on the other version of this that we did, and you are out there trying to get a woman. Well, 91% to 93% of Black women voted for Democrats in the last election cycle. And it's not like sane voting. So I'll put the video here of the star of the Acolyte like twerking to her weird oppression song.
I said, white people cry, what's the goal? If they could take one thing, what would it be? We so bored of the control discourse. We so bored of the control discourse. Eat it, they spin it, bastardize it and appropriate it. Let's not a clone, or something we created. Speak truth to power, keep an eye out for you silly racists.
It's like ultra external locus of control, like full on Marxism, has like gutted their culture and is wearing it as a skin.
Then stop! That's not
Black.
It's the lich!
Huh? Lich alert! Lich alert! Billy! Billy?
The book, Finn. Give me the book.
You messed Billy up. You just want to mess me all up.
And I should note here that actually Black men, 18% support Trump. So
Wow.
when you're looking at them trying to find a partner, it's really hard. Now, it gets worse than that. So here I'm going to put on screen the OkCupid charts that show reply rate by ethnic group. And here's where it gets really, really weird. Okay? So when there was a male sender, Black females replied to Black males at a lower rate than they replied to any other ethnic group. And interesting here also, Black males also replied to Black females at a lower rate than any other ethnic group. Typically, and it's not like by a small amount. When Black females reach out to Black males, they replied at a 37% response. If it was Asian, it was 55%. If it was Hispanic, it was 46%. If it was white, it was 51%, so significantly more. When a Black male reached out to a Black female, they replied 28%. But if it was, for example, an Asian male, 34% replied.
Oh,
If it was a
wow.
white male, 38% replied. And you might be like, oh, well, this is because Blacks marry outside their culture all the time. Actually, it turns out that Black women are the single least likely ethnic group to marry outside their ethnicity.
Oh, wow. Okay. So they will, if they do marry, they will
outside
eventually.
their ethnicity only 7% of the time, whereas Black men marry out 15% of the time. And I'll put another graph on screen here. So you'll see that for married Black men, 85% have a Black wife. And of those that don't have a Black wife, 8% have a white wife. For married Black women, 93% have a Black husband. And of those that don't, only 4% have a white husband. So this idea that like white people are stealing Black people, that is like a fear within Black culture, it's not true. It's only true when they're just people. This is the thing. It's not true in who they marry.
Yeah, I feel like I almost feel as though modern society, in highlighting that Black groups face discrimination and that there has been historical and still some present systemic disadvantages, especially against Blacks in the United States, especially those who descended from slaves, that now that we're elevating the fight against any remaining systemic racism, we're saying these people are discriminated against and therefore not as high status, right? Like not as desirable. And therefore, even among
Well,
that
there was
group,
a famous study on this where they chose dolls and the Black kids chose white dolls over Black dolls.
right? Because no one wants the loser group. And even if in trying to help the quote unquote, loser group or systemically disadvantaged group.
I don't think that that's what's happening here.
Are you sure? Because I feel like there's a lot of like highlighting of.
I'll give you evidence. They've redone that experiment. It's no longer true that the black kids use the white doll over the black doll. What is actually happening here is it's culturally speaking, black individuals do not prefer to date within their culture.
Well, but they're marrying within their culture. I don't get that. I feel like there's some.
Here's what you're missing.
Okay.
Remember, black marriage rates are incredibly low right now.
Yeah.
So there is 2 black populations, you could say. The one that has stuck to their tradition, which make up a little under 50% of the current black culture.
Yeah, or the person that's dating to marry, and then there's just the portion that's not dating to marry.
Overtaken by leftist Marxists, right? So which group is going to be using a dating site more? The group that's been brainwashed by leftist Marxists. Which group is going to be marrying more? The group that's not. That's the traditional black culture. Yeah. And here is what you see. Traditional black culture, they are still marrying within their ethnic group. It is the brainwashed ones, the ones who have been brainwashed by this Marxist cult, that self-hate other black individuals in black culture. The ethnic cucking that is going on here is by these ultra progressives who are pretending to help your movement. It is by, and this is actually something you see. If you want to see like a black woman who's married to a white guy, look at any high level black politician. AOC, Omar, they're all Jewish guys, right? Like they all marry white guys.
AOC is not black.
AOC isn't black?
Yeah, she's not.
Oh, okay.
She's
I guess in my head
she's Latina.
But the point I'm making
okay.
is the conservative blacks are much more likely to marry with.
Wait, are you like literally race blind? You can't see race?
I don't know. I know that people think she's progressive, so I thought she was black. Like I thought she was like progressive and ethnic, which means black, right?
Call me crazy, but I just don't see race. I guess I'm just the least racist person here.
Okay. Race is like often like a pretty obvious thing to observe. It's not like racist to notice.
I had to laugh. Zach, my goodness, I only see one race.
Ugh.
The human race.
Such bullshit.
No, I'm not prejudiced, okay? I don't even judge Trap for being a woman.
I'm a man, Katie.
I don't see gender and I don't see sex. I just see people.
You don't see how men and women look different?
No, I just see like shapeless blobs walking around. I just am so committed to equality. I'm just a good person.
Unless you're blind, you can tell that people have inherent differences.
Oh, I wouldn't know if I was blind or not because I don't see disabilities. I'm not a monster.
So if someone were in a wheelchair, you wouldn't be able to see the wheelchair?
I have never seen a wheelchair.
Why are you so proud of yourself?
Okay, well, here's a thought. Maybe you don't get it because you have less experience on Earth than I do.
Experience? We're all older than you.
I'm sorry, but I don't see age.
Oh, come on! You have 2 older brothers. Can you at least acknowledge that?
Yes, and I believe both women are my same age.
I haven't looked at a picture of her much, okay?
Sorry, I just find this very entertaining. You don't see race.
What is she then?
You see culture. Ortez? I don't know. If her last name's Ortez, what do you think she...
Hispanic?
Yeah.
I bet you she checks black on racial surveys.
No.
The point that I'm making here is it's
oh, sorry. Her last name is Ocasio-Cortez. Those are 2 very Hispanic names.
There's black Hispanics. You know this, right, Simone? Like, that's like saying she's American, so she's not black.
I really want to know now. I don't know why, but this is now important to me. Puerto Rican, but what before Puerto Rico? Oh, her ancestry includes Sephardic Jews, so Jewish as well.
Anyway, but this is actually important when you note this. The black people who stay within black culture and are getting married and are preserving their traditions don't have a hatred for other black people. The black people who are not, they are responding to both black men and women, black senders of emails on dating apps less than any other ethnic group.
Like racists, essentially.
They're basically acting like racists. Yeah. like you would expect like a Klan member to respond or something, which is wild. But I think it shows the effects that this group has had, and it shows that this group is malevolent. Like this new cultural system is malevolent and specifically caustic to Black culture. But the thing that we're going to get to at the end of this, when we get to like how this happened, is Blacks are just the canary in the coal mine on this. It's going to happen to all of them, to us.
Right, because the beginning of this was progressive culture saying, don't worry, I'm going to come in and save everything. And that is exactly when they then subsequently began to dismantle what was working for the Black community and Black cultures in the United States, and then begin to wear its face and act as though it is Black culture and speak as though it's speaking for Black culture, but only in ways that seem to be hurting it on the whole. Is that right?
Yeah, well, I've got to put a clip here from Boondocks in the episode where Martin Luther King comes back or doesn't die, and he just gets increasingly disgusted with the direction of Black culture.
Excuse me, brothers and sisters, please. If someone could just turn off.
King looked out on his people and saw they were in great need.
Will you ignorant please shut the hell up?
He just said what I think he said.
Is this it? This is what I got all those ass whoopings for? I've seen what's around the corner. I've seen what's over the horizon. And I promise you, you'll have nothing to celebrate. And no, I won't get there with you. I'm going to Canada.
Because that's the truth of it. Like, it is not what it was, but in a way that is much more dramatic than any other cultural group within the US, because it was explicitly targeted to try to turn Black culture into a entirely reliable Democratic voting bloc.
So you think that that's what it was, is that ultimately it's not just progressive culture, it's also progressive culture plus one political party ultimately saying, okay, we're now going to say that we speak for you and that you belong to us, and we are going to try to control you.
Well, yes, they have literally hijacked Black identity. I mean, think about the line that Biden literally said while running for president that didn't like end his candidacy immediately. If you don't vote for me, you aren't Black. If you don't,
how did Howard Dean get disqualified for an enthusiastic utterance? And yet Biden can say things like that and still get elected. That's really wild.
Because everybody knows that mainstream Democrats think this way, that they think that they own Black culture. It's so bad that there was an undercover reporter that we're dealing with right now. And one of the things that they got on us, quote unquote, got on us, is us saying that, well, we try to elevate the voices of POC women within the movement because it's better than, hearing about demographic collapse from a white guy. And they're like, oh, this is so insidious. Look at this. And I'm like, whoa. Do you think that you progressives have a monopoly on the elevation or centering of person of color voices? Do you think it's intrinsically wrong when anyone other than you does this? And it's like, yeah, obviously you do. Obviously you think there is some moral problem to people other than progressives having Black people speak their own mind about those causes. And this just shows the degree of entitlement the progressive culture has when it comes to Black culture. They just think it is theirs to own. When they make up all of these things about Black culture, when they say that being Black means you don't have a work ethic, being Black means you're not family centered, being Black means you
don't like numbers because
you don't believe in numbers or the value of time. What they mean to say are these are things that I as a progressive believe, and because we have stolen Black identity, we are supplanting them upon Black identity. And it is very, very, very important if any faction of healthy Black identity is to survive within our country, that they see this. And what I would say is, and this gives me a lot of hope, is first, it's important to note that there are 3 core Black groups within the US that are as culturally distant from each other as I might be from Russian American, maybe even more than that. It might be as I am from like a Chinese American. Specifically, this is the African immigrants, a completely different cultural group, often really looks down upon the Native American Black community. And I've seen this. Like, they are, of the people I know, the most outwardly racist, even more racist than Asians, because they know that they can get away with it, and they seem to like get off on it a bit. Especially like my Igbo friends, like, oof, they love baiting me because they know that like I get really uncomfortable when I hear somebody say something that's racist, and so they just have fun because they know they can get away with it all they want, and I just have to sit there and like, okay,
yeah, actually, no, I'm
guys.
having this internal montage of people that we've encountered saying really racist things and then watching your face. Oh, like that one person who will not be named who referred to our employees like this.
Oh my God, yes. Because he knew he could get away with it.
Yeah,
Like,
but he also loved seeing your face.
it is this thing that people of certain ethnic groups love doing to white people. Is just doing these racist acts and then watching me get like bright red, but not know that I can't say anything about it.
He really plays white people like a fiddle. Wow, it's amazing to watch.
Thank you for coming. Would you like some water?
Water. Like fire water? That's racist, and I do not appreciate it.
No. I didn't mean it like that. I just meant, you know.
I'm just messing with you.
Oh! I suggest we put on these authentic Wamapoke headdresses and dance around the table.
That sounds highly offensive.
Does it, white man?
No.
And I just hope that the souls of my ancestors don't put a curse on this festival. There are two things I know about white people. They love Matchbox 20, and they are terrified of curses.
So clearly, this is not offensive.
It is offensive.
I am very sorry.
The first group is the African immigrants. Actually, I'll add one extra group. You've got the African immigrants and then the immigrants from the islands, specifically like the Jamaican immigrants and the Haitian immigrants and the Cuban immigrants. And each of these are totally different groups as well.
Yeah.
With some of these groups, like if you talk about Nigerian immigrants, you know, they have higher test scores on average than white Americans. So if you're one of those, you know, like HBD people or whatever, there's huge diversity here. And then you have and one of the things I always point out was in HBD people is like, if you look at how distant people are genetically from each other, people in Africa are so much more distant from people from any other group. Specifically, if I look at like two random groups in Africa, they'll often be more distant from each other than white people will be from Native Americans or Asians. If you are going to divide all of the world's population into ethnic groups based on genetic distance, i.e. you were trying to divide 5 equally distant ethnic groups, white people, Asians, Native Americans, and North Africans would all be in one group. Like, this is the thing I don't get when people are like, all these, anyway, I always find this stuff pretty ridiculous. But you then have the first escaped slaves, and the escaped slaves created societies that were like really high education focused, really high traditionalism focused. And then you had the free slaves. And there's some really interesting articles on this that we might go over in a different episode, because, you know, there's also parts of American history that just are not covered because of wokeism, where you see that up until I'd say maybe the 80s, these two communities didn't really intermarry. The freed slaves versus the escaped slaves.
Well, I'm sure like they saw themselves culturally very different, wouldn't you? It would be hard just if you think logistically about the romance. Like if we're writing a romance novel, it would be really difficult to relate to someone who'd grown up so differently in such a different culture. I mean, just from when you look at what we constantly talk about Albion Seed, it would be very difficult for a white Quaker to marry a white Puritan. Like this is just one of those things where, of course, they wouldn't intermix a lot.
But once their cultures have been erased, because when progressives stole Black identity, they stole it as a pan-Black identity, which erased the cultural differences between the multiple Black identities within our country.
Oh no, yeah, there was this huge, homogenization, trivialization. I guess, you know, the thing you say about what the urban monoculture does in general, which is like, oh, you can keep your cute little costumes, but all of your beliefs are now going to be the same. This is just that on steroids, you know, with Kwanzaa
like,
and with like,
or you're Jamaican, F that. No, you're Black. With your
like Black. We're going to give you some new holidays and we're going to give you some new values and you're just going to be a good Marxist and you're going to vote Democrat and yikes.
But here we have to ask the question. So what the F going back to the graph here, what the F happened in the 1970s?
Yeah, seriously.
How did they start to destroy the culture even more? So this was in the 1980s when you really see things go asymptotic, right? You know, and some argue this was Reagan's war on drugs. They're like, well, a lot of people were arrested, and that doesn't explain it. Why doesn't that explain it? Because why did it keep going up after this period? Why is it still going up today? If it was Reagan's war on drugs, that should have been a temporary blip that they should be recovering from. What made the flywheel go off? And also just the numbers in Reagan's war of drugs were not big enough to explain this. And then you're like, maybe it was an explosion of drugs during that period. And there was an explosion of cocaine during that period, but it was much smaller than the current fentanyl explosion. See our fentanyl episode. So that doesn't explain it either. And the fentanyl episode might not have come out yet, so we'll see. But it'll come out eventually. I think it was one of our better ones. So I asked, what big thing happened in Black culture in the late 70s, early 80s? And then I had this nagging suspicion. And I went to Perplexity. And I said, when was rap invented? And it says, oh, rap was invented in the early 80s.
Well, but then there were also all the Black exploitation films in the 70s. Wasn't that more of a 70s thing?
I don't think the Black exploitation films promoted negative culture. If you watch the Black exploitation films, they often focus, like, the Black characters are generally like family oriented.
No.
They are generally heroes. They are generally pretty like small C conservative in their value sets. They're trying to, you know, get rid of drugs, get people like they're generally good guys.
Okay, I haven't watched any, so I wouldn't know. I just the term Black plus exploitation plus film doesn't bode terribly well for me.
True of the ideas that were being stereotyped was in rap music.
Did rap start out? But see, here's the thing: is rap as a genre isn't its lyrics. And for example, I don't know if you've seen this. Maybe you can find some clips online because they're freaking hilarious. But there's Japanese rap, and it's really funny because it's like Japanese rappers and like everyone's happy and smiling and like they're all like, you know, just doing their thing. So I don't see rap as a genre like typically less melodious spoken poetry with a beat is necessarily bad. It's lyrics that glorified violence and drugs and crime and sex and all that, right? Debauchery in general. So how are you defining rap? And was it in the beginning always like more oriented around crime and debauchery and things falling apart?
It genuinely was. And this is the point, right? Like it was like F the Police was one of the early songs that got a lot of people up in arms.
Okay.
But like I just decided to. I was like, okay, what are the top like rap songs today versus the top country songs, right? In terms of their themes. Okay.
Okay.
Okay. So, and I don't know, you know, when this is from exactly, but here it is. So number one in rap is Kendrick Lamar's Not Like Us. So this is from a bit ago when I was doing research for this. And this is a scathing diss track aimed at Drake, addressing allegations of inappropriate relations. And it's like, okay, so like diss tracks, okay? Like that, this was a collaborative track dissing Drake and J. Cole. Then Houdini by Eminem, a comeback single that pays homage to Eminem's past hits while showcasing his continued lyrical relevance. So a lot of these are I'm important. Like that's the theme of the song.
Yeah.
I'm important and I matter. The next one is Whiskey Whiskey, about drinking and indulgence.
Oh, because no one ever talks about beer and whiskey in country songs.
Okay, how about this? I will play clips from Whiskey Whiskey.
She like, tell me how you want it. On the rocks again. Feel to the top again. Feel bad. So addicted, ain't no we can do about it.
And then I will play clips from
God is great and beer is good.
We talked about God's grace, all the hell we raised. Then I heard the old man say, God is great, beer is good, and people are crazy.
Or God's great and beer is good. Or the one about whiskey, rain, like we pray for rain for whiskey, which is like, yeah, you get alcohol as a theme, but it's not about indulgence. It's
all very like, Christian alcohol. Okay.
We pray for rain so that we can work the fields to make grain and grow whiskey.
Rain makes corn, makes whiskey.
We worked hard to make that whiskey, young man. Okay, fine.
Then you have Wannabe, an anthem about the artist's confidence and assertiveness. So again, I'm so great. Loving on Me, next one. You can tell what that's about. So like, you're just getting here that it's all about I'm great, other people are terrible. Like really, really focused on self.
Well, and either that and or hedonism, if I am to only guess by lyrics alone, but I don't know these songs.
So if I go to country music, and country music is actually kind of hard here because the problem with the country music charts is when I go through it, it'll have Post Malone as the top song.
What?
And then Shabuzi as the top song. And I'm like, these are not country music.
Well, I also don't know if for rap or country we can really look at charts because there's a whole rabbit hole here, but the entire world of mainstream quote unquote successful music is a complete scam and very contrived and manufactured and not actually based on consumer based demand for the most part.
I'm not looking at the songs by like Post Malone, but anyway, I pulled it up on here on Perplexity, and it says Take Your Time is the first one. It's on love and relationships, explores the nuances of taking time in romance. So consider this, like one's about I'm the greatest person ever. The other is take your time in a relationship. Sunshine and Whiskey captures carefree moments and enjoying life. So it's not about like drinking at a bar, sunshine and whiskey. Next is Games, discusses the emotional turmoil of a broken relationship. The next is Homegrown, celebrates rural life and pride. The next is On to Something Good, focuses on resilience and optimism after setbacks. The next is I Remember Everything, poignant look back at past experiences and relationships. The next is Last Night. So this is, oh no, I thought this would be a party song. Deals with the complexities of love and making amends. The next is Fast Car. Okay, this one might be indulgent.
Okay.
A narrative about longing for freedom and a better life. Okay, no. Okay, the next is Wagon.
Oh, hold on. Okay, I'm trying to give some counter arguments here. Oh God, it's blurry. But if we look at number 3 on Spotify, it's God's Plan by Drake. Now, that sounds religious.
Okay, well, we can play a bit by that. But the point I'm making is overwhelming.
Well, there's parties in it.
It immediately starts about bringing girls to a party.
I can't understand most of all song lyrics, regardless of someone's.
But this actually matters because this is where people absorb their cultural values.
Yeah, no, that's well, that and TV shows and your friends and how you spend your time, then your books and whatever. Yeah, but yes, music is influential and it definitely shapes. Also, I think music is very powerful in the way it affects your emotions. So it can also shape what you see as a success case, as desirable, as what winning looks like. You're right. Yeah.
It matters a lot. When I'm trying to decide what's culturally normative and I have a song, F the Police, growing up or something like that, my relation to organized crime is going to be different than if I have songs about how great our troops are constantly. Like, and that's a common theme, by the way, in country music. Simone and I play like country music bingo. The tropes are what? Our troops are great. I have undergone challenges, but overcome them. I love my spouse. I love my kids. I love hard work, and hard work brings good things to me at the end of the day. I love America and small towns. I love simple things in America, like maybe like jeans and like chicken nuggets.
I don't think chicken nuggets are.
I've been through town, just my boy and me, knowing that he couldn't have the toy till his nuggets were gone. Green traffic light turned straight to red. His fries went a-flying and his orange drink covered his lap. While in my 4-year-old said a 4-letter word. It started with S, and I was concerned. He said, I've been watching you, Dad, ain't that cool?
In my house, it's not much to talk about, but it's filled with love and a little bit of chicken fried. Cold beer on a Friday night.
It's pickup trucks, it's dirt roads, it's jeans, it's beer, whiskey, wives, girlfriends, children,
But you're not going to
God
get a country song about
dogs.
sleeping with lots of women at a club. Like it's just not going to happen. I
Yeah,
mean,
no.
they might exist, but they're not going to be like popular mainstream country songs
Yeah.
because that's antithetical to the culture that's being portrayed.
No, the partying songs are like, we worked really hard, so now we're gonna take off our boots and dance.
I also would note around the way that they promote spending of money. And here's the messed up thing. Country music is derivative of black music. Country
Is it?
music as a genre came from black genres of
older.
music.
Yes. I was like, rap to country? How did
No.
but yes,
It was
yeah.
before rap. But what I'm saying is that black music didn't have to go that way. In fact, it did go in another direction. When we talk about country music, specifically here, country music came from blues, which was a mostly black form of music in its beginning, and was also itself derived from jazz, another black form of music. And here I would note, people are like, well, these sorts of themes are popular in country music because it's what the customer wants, and these sorts of themes are popular in rap because it's what the customer wants. But that's not really true, especially in the early days when the rap culture was being formed. Back then, the songs that were popular were determined less by customer sentiment and more by the big radio stations and record labels, which could decide which songs to promote and which songs to play more. And it made it very easy for an individual to manipulate downstream culture. And I think that's what we saw here was an intentional manipulation, an intentional attempt by individuals with a specific agenda to rot the family values and the wholesome nature, which was intrinsic to pre-60s American black culture. And I'd also note here, if you just listen to the themes in these two groups of songs and you think, okay, two groups are being exposed disproportionately to one theme and then another group to the other theme, how are you going to motivate high degrees of marriage and having kids when all the themes are about, I'm so much better than X person? Instead of like, I accidentally cursed in front of my kid and then he learned to curse, but he still loves and respects me. Like, you just can't compete unless you're constantly being bombarded with one of these that's telling you these are the cultural things you should value. And I'd also note here that I am not coming out here with like this wild take. This is something that a large number of influential black individuals were saying in the 90s, to the point where it just became sort of this trope of like, oh, you're an out of touch whatever, saying the cultural degradation is downstream of rap music. But like, I think that this trope allowed this truth to be obscured, even when it was obvious that the themes in rap music were very different than the themes in music targeted at different cultural groups, and that those themes were having an effect on the on-the-ground culture and on how status hierarchies worked within these communities. And I understand the temptation to say that the corruption of black family values came from the drug explosion in the 80s. It's just that the data doesn't really back it up and there isn't a good mechanism of action there. What I mean by that is the drug explosion then was lower than the fentanyl explosion now, and we haven't seen a similar cultural shift. In addition to that, I just don't get what the mechanism of action would be. How would drugs in and of themselves convince people that it is not high status to be in a loving monogamous relationship and have kids? Whereas I can see how a message like that might come from something like music. I can't see how it could come from drugs. And it's not just that I can hypothesize how it might have come from music. I know the themes of the rap songs I would listen to growing up, and they were very much focused on your status is determined by how much money you have and how many women you can sleep with, to an effect where it even affected me and my own values. Whereas when I listen to country music, it's very clear your status is determined by the amount that you're sacrificing for your family and for your country. But specifically, if you talk about indulgent expenses, that's one thing that's really big in rap, is all the expensive things I'm spending money on.
But every now and then when I get paid, yeah, we fancy like Applebee's on a date night with the Oreo shake and some whipped cream on the top. Don't need no Tesla to impress. My girl is happy, rolling on a Vespa.
Whereas in country music, the indulgences are always about like maybe beer and maybe a boat. Like,
yeah,
if I had $1 million, I'll put the song here about like, there's a couple songs about this. Like one is about like, well, if I had a lot of money, it might not buy happiness, but it could buy a boat and some beer. And then another one was like, if I won the lottery, I'd have a boat. But like boats don't cost that much. Like
they're not
recently looking to
yachts.
buy a
Keep in
boat.
mind, they're fishing boats.
I know everybody says money can't buy happiness, but it can buy me a boat. It can buy me a Yeti 110 ice down with some silver bullets. Well, I won dollars on a scratch-off ticket. Was just right, so I bought a 6-pack and a bag of ice. It ain't like we really need $1 million yacht. We're laughing all the way to the riverbank.
They're fishing boats to catch fish.
Yeah, they're not like, I'm gonna get a lot of like bling and diamonds and everything like that. It's like, I'm gonna get the minimum I need to enjoy my life, which culturally speaking,
Well, and the only country music song lyric I can think of now that involves buying a ring is in the context of finding a wife and proposing to her. Like that, you buy jewelry tactically to form a family, which seems helpful, especially when we're bringing this back to prenatalism and family formation and the impact that can have on a culture and the prospects of its youth. So that is important. Now, people have pointed out to us on Twitter, like they've pointed us to some really super pronatalist Black, I don't like performers. I didn't look into like one guy's music who was shared with us. So they are out there. And I think like where I have hope is that I think that many Black performers, influencers, commentators, writers, etc., are starting to fight back and say, you're not going to tell me what my culture is. This is my culture. And I'm going to lead by example and show you how great it is. And we're going to shift to that. The question is, can they, in a grassroots, non-coordinated fashion, overcome the urban monoculture, having essentially said, Black people in America are monolithic, they belong to us, and we control who they are and what they stand for?
Well, I think they can, as long as they keep their fences up. And by that, what I mean is, with their kids, they need to contextualize that whatever the Black culture is that's being sold to them by the urban monoculture and in society, that is not and never was real Black culture.
Well, I think we are seeing
abomination.
I think we're seeing
to brainwash them.
In some ways, I think we're seeing this pop up in especially church-based Black communities, where they are around a specific church group, a specific collection of pastors. I remember when we were in Atlanta looking at buying that company that made boxes for food. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
And we just walked around, and in our hotel, there was like a big church convention. And it was like I don't think there was a single white parishioner there that I saw. It was like a vast majority, but their dress, their comportment, their culture, their way of speaking, all of it felt very different from what is presented to us in mainstream media as this is Black culture.
It felt like Black characters I had seen from like the 50s and 60s, where they were much more put together than the white people, when they were much more like polite and professionalized and much more focused on, nuclear families and everything like that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there were, in the materials we saw from the gathering, heavy emphasis on relationship formation and also like independence hardware. It was it was probably Protestant or like Baptist. I don't know. Like it was
a Baptist group.
Yeah. And so you're going to see some Protestant work ethic in there, which apparently is very white, but tell them that. Right. And so that encourages me, is that these groups, that was clearly a group of like a church that had dating networks, that had conferences, that was gathering, that was probably creating some kind of walled garden that will, and keep in mind, as you pointed out at the beginning of this, Black birth rates in the United States are abysmal. So where there also is hope is that the groups that are having kids are opting out of whatever has been toxically created and are staying within these hopefully they'll stay within these walled gardens. They won't be attacked. They won't be sort of taken over by the urban monoculture, and they will inherit the future because I'm sure they have high birth rates.
I think the way to protect kids from this, and I think this can be done with evidence, is to show that what the urban monoculture is telling Black families is Black culture is categorically not Black culture. It is an abomination that was used to destroy Black culture in this country, that has led to the really high crime stats in Black communities, that has led to the really high unemployment stats in Black communities, that has, and actually you see this if you look at, and I'll put the charts on screen here, Black individuals who lived in areas was predominantly Republican, so that they were more conservative. Their IQ gap with whites is much smaller. Their earning gap with whites is much smaller. Like, these communities are improving themselves. And it gets worse than all of this. This entire system that's created by this affirmative action nonsense creates an environment in which the ultra competent Black individuals get, one, removed from the gene pool, as we've seen from the data, and two, really have no shot because they are always going to be better off taking some DEI position. If I went to Stanford Business School for my MBA, which is supposed to be like best of the best in the country, and like so many of my Black classmates are in like standard DEI positions. What I mean by that is like they like literally like help companies like Sweet Baby Inc. stuff. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, we're going to help you make sure that like you're not doing anything.
And that's because also there's like a lot of toxic legislation in California that's like, you need to have this many like non-white people on your board or whatever. I don't know exactly what the rules are, but they're playing arbitrage games like any smart person would.
No, they're not dumb for doing this. The problem is that it makes the smartest decision a middling success decision.
Yeah.
And then you have somebody like, say, me, right? Like, I was told that because I'm white, I am not eligible for the dream job that I wanted. I wanted to become a professor at Stanford Business School. And I was told under the table, we have a hiring freeze on white males who come from this hiring pathway. Specifically, I wanted to start a company, do well, become sort of publicly famous as an intellectual, and then get hired in, which is the pathway that a lot of the professors, it's like 50% of the staff gets hired in that way. And they said, no, you can only go like the traditional route of up through the PhD program, because we don't hire through this other pathway at all anymore if you're white and a male. And I was just devastated by that, because that had been my dream since I was a kid, right? You know, I had other dreams, but it was one of my dreams. I wanted to, use that as my platform for making changes to the world as a professor. And I was like, well, shit, like that's really sad. But because of that, I had to go for higher risk, higher reward opportunities. And now, if you look at the number of people that we touch with this podcast or other things we do, it's just like infinitely higher. And it's because I was forced to take the higher risk, higher reward thing as a high competence person.
Yeah.
They are essentially preventing Black entrepreneurs from having any success.
Well, and I want to look at this from another perspective, because obviously, speaking from our, to use progressive terms, lived experience as white cisgendered people, right? Yeah. We don't know what it's like to be of many different minority statuses. But what I do know is like my parents' experience living as gaijin, as foreigners in Japan in the 80s. And Japan in the 80s was pretty racist against white people. There was a show that they would watch, they recorded, and I watched it extensively as a child, called like Beat Takeshi's Castle. It was like one of the very early obstacle course reality shows. It was amazing. They had one token white actor in it. He was a former American baseball player, I think. His name was Animal, and his job on the show was to burst out of like water and like attack people going through these obstacle courses and like topple them off. And he was just really big, and he'd just be like, "Blah!" And then like he would just like slam them into the mud or something. And like that was what Animal did. And that was kind of like where things were in Japan at the time. There wasn't
even still, when I was working in Korea, this was a company that our firm, because I worked as a venture capitalist, as the director of strategy, had invested in. And he's like, in all honesty, I'd really prefer if you left the country, because I think that you make the country less aesthetically beautiful.
I mean, true.
I was like,
I'm sorry. Okay. They're so beautiful. They're so beautiful. But I have a point here, if you don't mind. I have a point, which is, if I were in Japan in the 80s, and if there were like a, larger population of white people in Japan, and like, I'm seeing them do really poorly, right? And I'm like, well, what do I do? Like, this is not great. I wouldn't trust white people who are thriving in racist Japanese institutions, right? Like, I wouldn't think that they are fighting in my best interest or really understanding where I'm coming from, even though they're still white. I also wouldn't trust white people who are starting like white person advocacy or like white person friendly organizations in Japan at that time if it wasn't yet proven. Like, I just wouldn't trust it. Like, I wouldn't know if it was reliable, if it was going to work out, if it was actually going to create good outcomes. I would look for white communities and white organizations and white-led groups that had been thriving in that environment for a very long time. And I would try to interact with those communities and I would give support to those communities. And when I think about what that equivalent would be, like if I try, which I can't, I know, if I try to put myself in the shoes of a Black person in the United States today, that's not Black Lives Matter. That's not anyone working within any institution that's like primarily white in the United States, any university, whatever, unless it's a historically Black university, in which case I would think differently. It would really be church groups, like long-standing, successful church groups that have lasted a while, that aren't brand new, that have parishioners who are thriving, period. Like that's where I would go if I wanted to raise a successful family that is Black in the United States.
I disagree. I think that you can start new organizations. I think that there's a lot of room for this. You can do it through church groups if you want, but I think that the key thing is to recognize that the left is not your friend. They are undergoing an active genocide campaign right now, and that you actually have variable voting pattern when you can create groups that vote to the right within communities, because it is a vote that nobody expects to go to the right. And so it matters a lot to politicians and stuff like that. So I think that that's really important. But I'd also note, like, if we're just talking about other things, we're like, and this is the interesting thing about being Black in America today, is that leftists have hidden how bad it is.
Have they? I mean,
oh, absolutely.
They don't make it look great.
Because they can only focus on things where it could plausibly be explained on white people as a primary cause. So, for example, leftists are never going to highlight that one of the reasons it's hard to be Black is that Black people respond to your dating messages lower than they would respond to any other ethnic group, even though they're the group you're most likely to marry. Like, they're not going to talk about that. They're not going to talk about the fact that, and here's a quote here, the majority Black neighborhoods have higher gun homicide rates than most white neighborhoods of the same socioeconomic status level, according to a new study published by Jamon Network, opened by Wharton professor Dillian Small. So even when you correct for income, the homicides are going to be higher in your neighborhood if you're Black. They're not going to talk about the fact that almost all of the Black women have been brainwashed into this ultra progressive group. So you as a Black man are going to really struggle to find a sane woman. And note, I'm not saying here, they're not insane because they're Black. They're insane because they're ultra progressives.
Well, I mean, I think it's also important to note that research has found that majority of progressive women in general, regardless of other attributes, refuse to date conservative men. So it's also like if someone is progressive and you're a man and you're conservative, like odds are they aren't going to date you. It's not about sanity or insanity. They're just from a political polarization.
Another
standpoint.
interesting thing to note here before, if they're like, oh, well, how could we vote for a Republican? Because Republicans are for increasing like police in areas, except, quote, most Black Americans favor maintaining or increasing local police presence or funding, according to a recent study published by the Journal of Criminal Justice. Surprisingly, this preference is more robust among Black Americans than non-Black Americans. It holds steady regardless of changes in crime trends or information about policing reforms. So they're more pro-police. And I guess what I would recommend and what I really fear for is twofold on this, right?
Okay.
One, what did this start with in Black communities? Like, what was the thing that started all of this degradation? It was people advocating for, let's go to the quote of that early book, free love, communal law and transient marriages, serial partnerships, cohabitation outside of wedlock, queer relationships, and motherhood.
So Marxism.
That's what started this all. And if that's growing within your community and people are telling you, oh, that's really your culture, you need to be afraid because this is going to happen to your people as well. So that's the first thing I note is this is not like a Black thing. It's just that the Black people were frankly economically disempowered during that period. And so it was easier to isolate them. And, peel off their most vulnerable members and convince them that their cultural history wasn't their cultural history. And that's something that the rest of us are all going through right now. The second thing is that Black individuals can get through this, but they need to look to their historic culture and then put a modern spin on it. So what do I mean by that? I mean, if you were not taught about your culture growing up from your family, don't trust the schools to teach it to you. Go to your grandparents if you're a Black person, or go to elders within your local community and ask, how were you disciplined as a child? How did you find a partner as a child? How did this community used to think about the value of marriage? One thing I would appreciate maybe not asking is what they used to think of Jews, because I'm trying to lower that.
Well, we haven't even touched on the Nation of Islam, which is this huge, like,
well,
what
Blacks
the
historically,
happened
this
there?
is a part of historic Black culture that people are not going to talk about. It's incredibly anti-Semitic. Specifically, there was a study, Scheindler, 1984, that 42% of Blacks said, as opposed to 20% of whites, quote, Jews have too much power in the United States, end quote. And a study in the 1970s, higher, 73% of Blacks in the 70s, opposed to 35% of whites, 50 and older, scored as high as possible on the index of anti-Semitism.
That makes sense in a world in which you see your ethnic group being systematically disadvantaged, and you happen to see that so many of the people disproportionately in power are Jewish. Like, aren't you going to start getting...
It gets worse. 81% in 1978, this was of a survey of quote unquote Black leaders, said that, quote, Jews choose money over people, end quote. I'm just saying, maybe let's not bring back the anti-Semitism. But what I would say is the based takes that I have seen from Black community members, like who's the guy who everyone thinks is crazy, who had all those based takes and was pro-Trump.
Oh, Kanye.
Kanye. He also tried to bring back the anti-Semitic aspect. And I think that's not, I think that you're right. It's not intrinsic, and that it's not like necessarily something that needs to be tied to.
Well, I just think that any group that is systemically disadvantaged and any group that's just average is going to be a little bit suspicious of any other group that's disproportionately in a position of power, like vis-a-vis their general population representation. Like, it's very easy to form conspiracy theories around that. And we've had, we've detailed discussions
Actually,
about
interesting
this.
part of traditional Black culture is that it was very pro-conspiracy theory.
The computer. Another idea stolen from the black man. Did y'all know that George Washington Carver made the first computer out of a peanut? A peanut!
Like, they were very conspiratorial and not trusting for good reason. Like, you look at like the Tuskegee experiments or other things like that.
Yeah,
like,
there's every reason to be.
They had every right to be conspiratorial in their mindset.
Give me my money. Yeah, my money. I don't care whose bank it is. Right. I know whose money's in it. Right. No, I'm keeping it real. That's all I'm saying. High conspiracy, brother. High. What you mean high? Like high yellow wanna be white? Huh? High like the white man wants to keep us? Huh? High? You ain't smell no weed on me, did you?
And I think that that's a part of Black culture that still exists within the more, when I talk with my like more conservative traditionalist Black friends, they're like super conspiratorial, and it's kind of fun because it's also part of like Protestant culture or like white Protestant
the
culture.
only other
my
place
cultural
where we've seen more conspiratorial stuff is like conservative conferences, but not old guard conservative conferences, new guard conservative conferences.
Actually, yeah, I would encourage like if Black people who like are uncertain about how accepted they will be within conservative groups, I'd really recommend they check them. Like, just try going to one of the conferences. Everyone I know,
yeah, you'll expect to go finding a bunch of racist white nationalists, and you'll end up finding a bunch of extremely welcoming people who are like, haven't you heard about the injections of the transhuman modules into your blood veins by the vaccine? I just completely demonetized this video with that, didn't I? I wish you could.
Well, by the we'll cut out the end part there, but yeah. No, that has been my experience. It's been really, really fun.
Sorry.
Anyway.
What do you want for dinner? Or do you have a final statement about this? Like in some.
No, in some, it's mortifying that this happened. And I think that so many people who are sort of like HBD bros and stuff like that, they'll point to all these crime statistics and okay, there may be other cultural things at play here, But I think the vast majority of this is caused by the fact that 70% of Black kids are born to single parents, when it used to be like about half the rate of white kids. And that culturally they were destroyed and steamrolled, but that doesn't need to be persistent. That there is a coming back from this. It just revolves sort of finding the scattered troops that are still tied to the original culture, bringing them together, and then building better barriers for the next generation.
So if this were a game of Clue, it was the urban monoculture in the 70s with
rap. And I know that's so classic conservative, but like it fits so well.
And are we going to hell for doing this, for raw dogging this? Yeah, we are.
Yeah, for raw dogging this episode, this was a dangerous move. But I think that most like Black people who aren't brainwashed who watch this would be like, yeah, this is true.
We're screwed anyway. For some political campaign test ads, because we're using our podcast as a means of people getting to know me as a candidate. I linked to our Bears video.
Yeah,
because it's a really good one, and I'm like, they should get the good stuff. One woman commented like, "Are you serious? Are you really running for office? You're alienating yourself instantly from 50% of the population." Because the title is "Are Women Dangerous?" And I'm like, yeah, I know. Like, we're never gonna be able to successfully run for office.
I think it will convince more people than you think it will. Things that create that sort of emotional reaction, they get people to think.
That was my thought, but
why did you choose the Bears video? That's for men only. I hope you tagged it men only.
No.
You shouldn't do that.
I think that offended women would watch it. That was my hope. We'll see.
No, they won't.
I'll chip it then.
You terrible woman.
I love you. What do you want for dinner?
I don't know. Something. Oh, yes. I need to get rid of the meat. So the meat.
Oh, yes. Right. I'm doing that. Now, do you want it with Mexican street corn or with fried rice?
Let's do Mexican street corn.
I think that'll be fun. All right. We're on. I love you. If you would get the kids when 5 p.m. rolls around, I'll get dinner ready. Sound good?
All right. Bye.
Bye. Oops. I'm there.
Before we start.
Yeah.
You remember the graphs I showed you last time? You need to look shocked as if I'm showing you them again this time, okay?
Hi.
That's the way it works. And you go, oh, Dios mío, I've never seen this graph.
I wish I could record that and make it a ringtone.
Ooh, you gotta include the little racist side thing there. Oh.
Oh, now you just sound like Princess Peach when she is supplanted from her car. Oh no! Who did you play in Mario Karts?
Who did I play?
Yeah.
Well, I'm more familiar
Bowser?
with the more recent one. I like the metal characters because I like the weight that they have.
No. We're talking our childhoods. Like the last time I ever played video games.
Character.
You never chose, like, you just would go with a different one each time? You were
Yeah,
one of those?
I guess. Variety, you know me.
Okay, which one was I always?
Princess Peach, I would guess. Or Bowser?
Really? Okay.
Or Daisy?
No.
The mushroom?
Yoshi.
Oh, Yoshi is the best.
Yoshi is amazing. He would make this sound. Sounded like a Haktua. He was the original Haktua. Yoshi. Great character to play.
All right.
Let's do it.